Salutations! Thank you for lending an ear to The Voice of the Times for Sunday, March 6, 2022, brought to you by Wilkin Depot, the country's leading home improvement and construction supplies retailer. Shop conveniently 24/7 with the Wilkin online store. Just go to shop.wilkin.com.ph. For today's editorial, Philippine public debt politicized and misunderstood. In his parting message at the last economic forum organized by this newspaper, Central Bank Governor Benjamin Diokno said the public debt should not cause Filipinos to worry. That seems pertinent given the recent news that it had ballooned to 12 trillion pesos, which figure has been hyped up by some candidates for their gain. Despite the increase, the Philippine debt problem is not bad relative to historical records and compared to that of other countries. The debt might shock fewer people if the number was viewed in context. For example, the total public debt, even with the increase, is about 60% of gross domestic product, an indicator measuring the final costs of goods and services in a country over a period of time, normally a year. The debt to GDP ratio was higher when Gloria Macapagal Arroyo was president and between the terms of Corazon Aquino and Fidel Ramos, according to reports citing the Bureau of the Treasury. Granted, the face value of the public debt did increase in the past couple of years. Public debt was only 42% of GDP when President Rodrigo Duterte started his term. But the increase seems mostly linked to the pandemic, which required massive government spending for subsidies to those affected by the health emergency and other crisis mitigation programs. Moreover, the Philippine situation is not bad in relative terms. Japan, for example, has a debt to GDP ratio of 237%, but no one questions its place in the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or the OECD. This is an exclusive club to which only the wealthiest nations belong. In Southeast Asia, Singapore has a larger debt-to-GDP ratio of nearly 130%, and Vietnam, which many envy for its rapid development, has a ratio similar to that of the Philippines. Looking at public debt in another way buttresses the point argued here. Using debt per capita, which means total public debt divided by the population, the Philippines performs comparatively better. The world's largest economy, the United States, has a debt per capita of about $85,000 or 4.34 million pesos. In Southeast Asia, this metric is worse for countries with smaller populations, like Singapore that has a per capita debt of around $93,000. Compared to neighbors with a population size similar to the Philippines, the local situation seems ordinary. Vietnam, with about 98 million people, has a per capita debt of around $1,600. And for Thailand, which has about 67 million citizens, that figure is more than $3,600. Given the latest public debt total, the Philippine per capita debt comes out to a little over $2,100. The dismal portrayal of the domestic economy should not be dismissed as typical political rhetoric made during the election season. It may actually harm policymaking at a time when the Philippines, like every other country, needs effective but unpopular policies to recover from the COVID-19 economic impact. As mentioned before in this space, the Philippines should ramp up public spending. What normally drives its economy is private consumption, which accounted for about 70% of GDP before the pandemic. Policymakers might not want to bank on that because of consumer losses suffered during the pandemic. Also, there is a threat of inflation because of skyrocketing fuel prices attributed to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Moreover, private investments, another GDP component, might remain low in the near term. Like consumers, most private firms might avoid spending for now. Given the scenario described here, the government needs to spend more to make up for lower consumption and private investments to improve its chances of realizing GDP growth targets. Last year, government spending did improve significantly, but as mentioned earlier, expenses were mainly in response to the pandemic and unlikely to be repeated in 2022 and beyond. It sounds counterintuitive, but the worst economic policy for now would be to reduce spending. To understand this, people should recall the basic economic principle that making money requires spending or investing. Dr. Diokno recommends that the next government should continue the rapid pace of infrastructure development, even if that requires more borrowings. That is sound economic advice that merits support. And that's the editorial for Sunday, March 6, 2022. For more news and information, get a copy of the Manila Times on print, subscribe to its digital edition, or log on to www.manilatimes.net. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, and listen to the Voice of the Times.